you may have thought this was a 15-minute talk on the health of the GCC. It's actually a 15-minute talk on how I can't drive display drivers. So, we are a community that likes to be inclusive. And I know it's a matter that increasingly concerns us, that if I look in this room, it's not looking terribly diverse. There's Peter Drucker's saying, you cannot manage what you cannot measure. So one of the questions is, how do we measure how healthy our community is to try and make it more healthy? This talk, I'm going to introduce you to a few techniques that may help us. I'm not going to give many prescriptions. I'm really just showing a set of tools that we can explore further. This is something I'm passionately interested in, but it is a side issue. It's a side hobby for me. It's not my day job. So it gets done in little bits as I go along, but I hope you go away inspired to go and take this forward, and someone might feel I want to put more effort in there. So, first place to look is that now we've all got everything on Git, at least for the source code, we can have a look at the Git repository and see what that tells us about the community. And we can compare release branches to see how many commits and what's going on in particular releases. Or we can compare using dates to see how much is going on per year. So we can see how many GCC commits per year there have been and how many commits there are per release. Now, in the Git repository, releases before 2.95 are a bit hard to work out, but you can see every year. So you can see this project grew over about 10 years, and then for the last 25 years, it's been pretty stable. In terms of commits per release, I'm not sure, 3.2 I think might have been a very short release because hardly anything happens in 3.2. But apart from that, we're a fairly steady community, growing just a little bit, but we're stable.
3.2 was an ABI change. Yeah, that was the ABI.
That was the ABI change. Okay, so I couldn't remember what happened there anyway. And by saying, let's look at just parts of the Git repository, we can see how much activities going on in the different front-end projects. So, we can see there the C++ activity. That's a bit of a guess, that one, because sort of everything hangs around C and C++ anyway. But we can see that's a solid orange block all the way through. We can see our Ada's been there for a long time, and the team from Ada Core particularly, that's a big active project. We can see how Fortran came in a while ago, and how we've had a steady contribution from that small but active Fortran team. We can see Go coming in and then Go going out. We can see the same with Objective-C, right back to the beginning of Objective-C, now dying away. And the last 3 years, we can see Rust is becoming a very big part of the thing. So we can start to see which projects are active. And you'll have seen the post from Andrew Pinsky a few weeks ago about 3 architectures that are being proposed to be dropped this year because they've got no maintainers. They don't work with the modern register allocator. And, well, let's have a look at backend activity. We've got something like 48-ish backends, depending on quite how you count. And I've done things like group ARM and ARH64 together because, in the same way that RISC-V is the 32 and 64-bit, and all the x86 stuff goes together. But what you can see there is there are actually, these are the only backends where if I plotted all 48, you'd see there's this just thin bit at the top, which are the ones that are too thin, we can't see any activity. There's basically 4 or 5 projects that are actively being pursued. There's Intel, there's ARM, there's RISC-V, there's and then there's RS6000, so the IBM one. But beyond that, if you look at RL78, M32, and Epiphany, they are on that graph, but you probably can't say they're little sort of thin things at the top, and they were a bit active a while ago. So the justification is there to say they're not active. In fact, when I did this, I haven't put it up here, but I've got the graph for all 48, and there's a lot more architectures which are just not active, but they're not breaking LRA, and they have got maintainers. And just to confuse matters, last week I got a contract to maintain and develop Epiphany. But that's...
Really?
Yes.
Well, good to know, because I was going to suggest we kill it.
I would suggest you still kill it, because I think it can come back when it's got sufficient investment to put it back in.
I think that's a fine place to
Yeah.
agree.
And AVR is actually up there.
Yeah, AVR. Yeah, that's the other. I knew there was one I'd missed. AVR has, I mean, AVR has, and that's an entirely community thing. I don't think.
George is active in the GCC community, but yeah.
I'm not sure how much he's being paid by his employer to do
Yeah, I
that.
have no idea.
In S390 it should be up there.
So I'm happy to go and review the data, because S390, there's not a huge. It almost. I didn't want to put too many on this graph. It's one of them. It's one of the larger of the smaller ones, if you see what I mean.
That's a fair way to put it.
There's a bit of an arbitrary cutoff. I think RS6000 was bigger, so I put that one in there. And you could, yeah. So next thing is, what about contributors? And we can look at, again, by release or by year, but by release, if we format by name, we see who the people are. And that's quite good for tracking people who are contributing as they move from companies, who are the big movers and shakers, whoever they're working for. And the other thing we can do is we can look at emails and just filter out the domain names. And so I'll filter out contributors, and I look for domain names that have more than one contributor, but aren't gmail.com. Now, there's a bit of an issue with GNU.org there, which slightly confuses matters. But it gives me a proxy for how many companies are employing people who are willing to contribute under their company, and there's more than one person. So let's have a look at those graphs, and we can see there. So steady number of, again, the same thing, there's about, per release, a few hundred authors per release, and it's going up very slightly, but it's been stable for a long time. And actually, with corporates, we've got about 30, nearly 40 domains identified that appear to be corporate domains. Okay, so again, healthy and steady. Yeah. So when, but we can then go into detail, and we start imagine this. So we start to look at authors by backend, and what I've got here is I've got the ARM and AArch64 compared with all the RISC-V, and what you see is that ARM AArch64 actually has got big. It's gone down a bit. It goes up and down a bit because ARM's perhaps more interested in LLVM a bit these days. But what you see is suddenly RISC-V takes off, and actually RISC-V actually has comparable, I mean, there's statistical variation in terms of numbers of contributors to ARM now. In terms of corporate contributors, actually there was a bit of a spike in GCC 14. I think that's when there was a lot of work in the first bringing in of RISC-V vector and so forth. And the only thing I would say is ARM's a big company, but it owns the processor. And it's quite good because it's got Linaro, it's sort of software organization. ARM and Linaro, who do you expect to? But they actually persuade a significant number of their big customers, Qualcomm and so forth, to contribute. So ARM there. RISC-V isn't owned by anyone. And there's an element where I think, yeah, well, it's good, we've got 20 contributors. There's 4,000 members of the RISC-V Foundation. Where's the other 3,960? So I think, you can start saying from RISC-V Foundation, you might be have to think about, and I know when I go to RISC-V Summit, it's so big, so everyone assumes someone else will do it.
That's a fair assessment.
Yeah. And then we can go into, you split on this. So release 15, 391 people contributed, 38 corporate names, 49 individuals contributing more than once a week, you know who you are. Highest individual contributor, 588 commits. Yeah. Well, here we come here. Release 3, going back, and it's been stable back to 3.0. 32 corporate names, 43. So it says similar numbers. Highest individual commits was 1,000, except that contributor was called GCC administrator. So that's really Richie and Jakob put together, and probably one or two others. But
it's the cron job.
Yeah, it's the cron job. So, but there were several other committers who were named who were up in that sort of bracket as well. So it wasn't like there was one person doing 1,000 and then everyone was doing 300.
There were certainly numerous large contributors.
Yeah, and
So,
I don't want to. I've got all the names, but I wasn't going to embarrass anyone.
we know each other. We want to reminisce.
So we can look how we're doing against the other big project, LLVM. And what you can see is, if you look at the commits per year, GCC's been good for a quarter of a century. And then a quarter of a century ago, this new compiler comes, and 6 years later, the number of commits per year overtakes GCC. And LLVM is still going up. Ignore the drop off at the end. That's because this data is actually a little old. It's earlier in the year, and it's per year. But there's some evidence that possibly LLVM is now perhaps just peaking a bit. Okay, but LLVM's where GCC was 25 years ago.
I'm curious about the LLVM. Like, is it commits in the back end, middle end? Because what I've noticed.
I commend to you my talk, which looked strikingly similar to Euro LLVM. And I can share the slides if anyone wants later. But the answer is you can do exactly the same analysis on LLVM. And that's where I first did it, in fact. I think one thing I've tried to do here is the LLVM is a super repository, so it's got LLDB, it's got LLD in it, and so forth. So that's why it says GNU and not GCC here, because I've put in GDB, I've put in bin utils as well. Okay, I mean, this stuff you can go down a rabbit hole. You can spend an awfully long time looking at this stuff. And in terms of super committers, I've looked at recent releases, GCC 15, LLVM 20, about the equivalent, and you can see how it has got more activity, 1,500 compared to 400, 70 corporate domains, 63 individuals contributing once a week. Highest individual contributor, rather higher. So it is just it's a bigger project, okay? But, and I don't think it's not dominantly bigger, but, they're a more active project, and we might ask, what are the factors driving that?
Not only is it more active, it has that is higher.
It has a growth rate that's higher, though.
Possibly.
It's hard to say from that graph.
Certainly for the last
10, 15 years.
They've had a higher growth.
Yeah, this graph you can see it.
If you graph new names,
Sorry?
If you graph new names in the repository, you can see that the growth rate is still going up.
Yeah, exactly. You see what I'm not giving you all the answers. I'm just giving you can see all the questions you can ask.
So the reason why I ask about the breakdown of LLVM's middle end versus back end stuff is because I've noticed a lot of LLVM contributors are mostly in the back end, while GCC contributors do a lot of stuff in the middle end.
Yeah, I don't know. That's a good question. I think it's a question to ask. Let's look
There's
at
all kinds of ways to slice this data
Yeah,
up and figure
yeah.
what.
And I did something interesting here, and what you can see from here, I looked at just at the domains, so a number of companies getting involved. And for ARM, you can see that ARM has far more activity in LLVM than it does GCC. So it's clearly that ARM has switched over to becoming more prominently an LLVM house rather than a GCC house. Whereas if you look for RISC-V, actually, even though LLVM's a much bigger project, the numbers aren't that different, actually. And actually, RISC-V has a relatively much stronger GCC community, which is interesting.
I think that kind of brings back to the point of the last talk and a lot of stuff that Jeff was mentioning.
Yep.
ARM had a push to migrate a lot of their proprietary compiler stuff, which is based on LLVM, into the upstream.
Yeah.
So maybe this will temper off.
Might do, yeah. Let's see. I mean, this is something we can keep on doing. These are scripted. I can push these scripts and publish these on a regular basis. But what about other activities? Now, these are questions, because I haven't done this work, but mailing list activity. And these are the questions you want to ask. What proportion of patches are successful? How many reviews are needed for each patch submitted? How long from patch submission to commit? How do the statistics vary by front-end patches and back-end patches? How do we compare with other projects? And for example, LLVM tracks this, and for years have found that 3.5, 3.7 reviews per patch. And that's telling, because it means if you want people to take your patches seriously, you'd be better be helping out on 3.7 patches yourself. Okay, so you need to don't rely. If you want people to help you, you've got to help them. In terms of examining the mailing list, well, we can go and look at it on the web, and you can see all the information. If you want to do a web crawler, and I'm not web crawlers are not my thing, you can see the data that we want there. It's fairly easy to get there. We've got, we can see the hierarchy within a discussion thread. You can see, come on. Oh, it's taking, yeah. We can see that we've got identifiers and the chain of identifiers. We can see we've got links to the potential. Yeah.
It really does want you to talk about this.
And we can go in and potentially we can do natural language processing to see actually when do we see things of this patch is rejected, this patch is accepted, and so forth. We can look in Bugzilla. And Bugzilla's great, and it's a shame it's perhaps not more rigorously tied into the commit activity process. We can see all the open bugs, but we can look at the issue detail. We've got a description, and actually from that we can see at least how many comments are made on each bug. And that's perhaps a proxy for reviews, but it's not quite the same thing. And the nice thing about Bugzilla is it is an SQL database, and I'm not sure whether there's a public exposure of the SQL interface, because that will make it a lot easier to ask these questions of the Bugzilla database.
There's our SQL.
Yeah.
No. I was gonna say there is a Bugzilla itself has another interface that you can use.
Yeah.
And I don't know anything about it. I do know there is a interface that you can do and everything, but I don't know how to use it.
So I'll just tell you another one. Now, this is LLVM. This is not GCC, but it's something that you can do with LLVM, which is because they have all their activity the last year and a half or so on GitHub, then GitHub gives you an API, and we can ask it to tell me about all the particular types of issues raised and when they're created and what their state is and when they were created. And post-processing, I can come up with graphs like this very easily, which are what PRs got merged, which PRs did not get merged. So they've got about a 90% if eventually gets merged, and how many comments per merged PR. And you can see that 3.7 coming out, or 3.5, 3.7 there. So finding what the APIs are for whatever we do, we can do that. I want to just leave you with one more thing, which is about diversity and inclusion. I'm not going to really talk about this. I want to point you at someone else's work. I feel as a 65-year-old white male, I'm not best qualified to do this. And it's an area where if you're going to do it, you've got to do it right. And it's this man here who inspired me, and I heard him talk about a decade ago. Andrea Capilupi, he was at Brunel University, he's now at Groningen. And he's done a lot of work doing rigorous statistical analysis to infer gender activity in open source communities and make strict statistical hypotheses. I've given you 2 links there. The slides will be up obviously later. One to the talk he gave to the British Computer Society that got me fired up. He's a good speaker. And I commend that. It's only a short talk. It's only about 20 minutes, but it's really inspiring. And the second is to one of his, he's got loads of papers, but that's an early paper which talks about that. And what's good about what he does is it's not, a lot of gender stuff can be very subjective. This is giving you the statistics to have that conversation. So he does analysis of mailing lists. And he comes up with some statistical hypotheses. Women and men are similarly represented, or that women are underrepresented. Women do the same number of questions of men. Women provide the same number of answers as men. Women engage for a statistically similar length of time. Women and men achieve similar levels of reputation if you've got a mailing list that's measuring reputation. And he did this for Stack Overflow. Stack Overflow is notoriously not very inclusive, and all the null hypotheses failed. Okay? Now, I've not even started, it's a fair bit of work, but it will be very interesting to see, as a community, how engaging are we? And you can gain some statistical evidence here. Do women join our mailing lists? Do they ask questions? Do they answer questions? How long do they stay engaged? So I say, I'm not really going to say anything about that beyond saying there's some really interesting work there. And we can measure the health of our community using technology to inform the discussions and debates we have. Okay? So I hope that has given you some ideas to think about. I've got my scripts as far as they go on GitHub. Feel free to laugh at my abuse of Bash. I'm very happy for anyone who says, here's a better way of doing it. But hopefully it's given you a few things to think about and you take away. So thank you very much. Anyone want to ask anything?
Just a quick note. It's interesting to see that LLVM is hitting about 90% of contributions being accepted. I'm happy to hear that number. My guess was GCC would be in that 90% range as well, give or take a little bit. That's just a guess, but seeing that LLVM is in the same ballpark is good.
Yeah, go ahead.
So for my talk, I did a similar analysis, which is why I knew a couple of things off the top of my head. And I would like to hear your thoughts, because you're talking about how GCC is a hub community, and of course will affect the number of contributors, we're stable, blah, blah, blah. And one thing that I noticed is that GCC as well as GDB and GDC have a very consistent number of new contributors every year. And yet the number of people contributing every year does not change. We see new names every year, we see tens of new names every year, we do not see people sticking around. And I wonder if you have thoughts on what that means.
I think use this approach, we'd be able to measure that and tell you what the actual figures were. Yeah. I don't know. I mean, these are old projects. These have been going, GCC is nearly 40 years old, and it could just be steady state. There is a natural,
No, we see new names every year. We see, I can't remember for GCC, but it's close to the hundreds, if not in the hundreds.
Yeah.
New names every year.
But then they're leaving as well.
Yeah.
And that may be just natural. People move on to other things, and we may be. I can take some. I'll come back to you, David.
Okay, so just one point on Bugzilla. Just measuring the number of comments is probably not sufficient, because
no, I agree.
One phenomenon with Bugzilla is it does go down rabbit holes, which have got absolutely nothing to do with the original reported problems.
I agree with you. I agree. I think I really want to show the tools we had. I think that, comments on Bugzilla, probably, David, you want to know?
Well, no, just an answer. I mean, one of the things I noticed is GCC is being used as a training ground for LLVM.
My perspective on the new contributors is that a lot of things that will happen sometimes is people go, oh, I want this new feature, I guess I'll do it. They come in, they do it. And some of it is they get frustrated by the process because there is friction between maintainers and developers to some extent. Don't get me wrong, I don't blame the maintainers for this. There is a certain level of standard that needs to be maintained. But that's kind of how I started. And then for a long time, I couldn't focus on it. So I had the one big contribution, then nothing for a year. Then I got a job lets me work on this again. So I would imagine there's a little bit of that as well. It's transitioning
Probably
from
a lot of that.
Yeah, absolutely.
And we can ask questions and see how many people come in and stick. I'm very conscious Jörn Renneker joined the project because he was fed up because his games programs wouldn't compile fast enough. That was 1995. So.
I was just really curious. I know you said this isn't really possible at the moment to look at the number of reviews and comments per patch, especially with LVM not having a maintained model, possibly moving towards that. Sort of look at the effect that has of sharing the reviewing work out.
I think there's loads of this is just touching. I say it's a side. So it's a side hobby for me because I'm curious as to how the communities hold together. I'd encourage anyone else who wants to pile into this, get involved, because there's so many. Every time I do more, I could ask this question, I could ask that question, and I think there's real good. What's the influence of different maintainers?
Just did you have any insights like the how sort of number of messages on the mailing list drops off, sort of by frequency of reviewers compared to LVMs? Just curious whether it's mailing.
No, I've done hardly anything on the mailing list because basically it starts to get into web crawling technology, and that's way outside my comfort zone. Is your own?
I'd say that mailing lists are much harder to pull statistical data out of,
Yeah.
as opposed to the system that LLVM is using.
Yeah.
Which may be an argument for saying if you want to manage it, we want more rigorous systems.
Yes, if I was in management, LLVM's approach is much better.
When you mean per release, commits per release, you mean you look at branches as a whole or between?
So it's between branches. So I look at everything that's in the GCC 15 branch and subtract away anything that's in any previous branch.
Okay, so there might be effects of how many patches we backport or not.
Oh yeah, absolutely yes. Yeah, and I exclude merge commits. Yeah.
If you need to get, please don't crawl the mailing lists.
Oh.
Hopefully Anubis will stop you. But you can fetch all the mailing list contents by going to inbox.sourceware.org, and there are instructions on how to mirror.
Okay, that's useful. I'm happy. I'm happy because I don't like doing web crawling because it's too hard. But I don't mind how you do it. It's basically I'm saying there's a database there. I mean, the nice way to go in would be to go to the underlying database and use database tools to get to it. But those often aren't exposed in the public. I don't know GNU Mailman at all. I did have a quick look and I couldn't see if it was offering an interface to do that, which is what we want.
Was there any analysis of size of commits?
No,
Okay.
but the way you could do.
When you look at the new toolchain project, so BNUtils, GDB, GLC, GCC, are these statistics similar between the different communities, or they are different?
I haven't done that breakdown. I did do it for LLVM because I could actually do it in the meta report. So where I did those different front-end projects, if you look at the LLVM one, it's got a LLDB bar and it's got an LLD bar, but I didn't do it for BNUtils or anything. I just stuck to GCC.
In terms of contributors per year, it's basically the same, just the number changes, but everything else is the same.
Yeah, I mean, but it's easy. These scripts are supposed to be generic. If they're not, please send me a patch. So you should be able to just point them at BNUtils and say, you know, here's the. And then you basically have a thing that says, here's the name, here's the branch names for all the branches, and you know, then you should just crank the handle and it'll abuse GNU plot to put out a nice bar. Yeah, but I mean, these are all good questions, and hopefully they're caught on the. Hopefully the audio will pick them up. Yeah. Any more questions? Perfect. It's lunchtime. It's gone lunchtime rush because all the food will be gone.